Kelly, are you prepared?
I am.
All right then. At this time, we will call the meeting of the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District's Finance Committee to order. Roll call should be quick and easy, I imagine.
Do we have a motion for the consent agenda?
So moved.
I will ask if the public, any members of the public wish to speak on items on or not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
There's a second. Board Clerk, will you please call the roll?
I will. Director Rosali.
Aye.
Director Clark.
Aye.
And Director Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Moving on to our presentation items, we will receive a financial report through April 30, 2017. Ms. Thomas, thank you.
Good evening, directors, Chief Harms. Amanda Thomas, Chief Financial Officer for the district. This evening I'm going to present the financial results for the district for the first 10 months of our fiscal year 16-17, so that's the 10 months ending April 30th, 2017. We'll start off looking at the chart that shows the district's cash balance. Just to orient you, the red line is showing the current fiscal year and the green line is showing last fiscal year. And you can see, just sort of looking at the general trend as we move through the year, our cash balance gets depleted as we make expenditures in the early months of the year and before we receive our first installment of property taxes. And then we see it, so then we're in this negative territory called the dry period funding, where we're effectively borrowing money from the county during that period of the year. Then we receive our first installment of property taxes, and generally we have that cash deposited in our fund in January. So that's where you see it cross back into positive territory. And then as we move through the months of the year before we receive our second installment of property taxes, our cash balance generally declines during that period. So you can see that this year has followed that trend, so that since January, our cash balance has declined in each month. We're currently at a total district cash balance, and I do want to stress that this is all funds. So it's not just our general fund, but it's all funds that we hold, of a little over $20 million. You can see that that is a higher cash position than we had at the same point in time last year, if you compare that where we are on the red line as of April 30th to where the green line was last April 30th. And the primary reasons for that are due to both the timing and the size of our IGT and the financing that we've done. So both of those, we saw some activity earlier in the year and also larger amounts that are contributing to a higher cash position at this point in the year than we had last year. So turning to look at general fund reserves, the difference between this chart and what we just talked about is that we're no longer talking about actual cash, but we're talking about our reserve position, which we calculate by taking our starting reserves, adding in all the revenues that we've recognized so far during the year, and subtracting all of our expenses that we've recognized so far during the year. And here we are just looking at the general fund. We're not looking at any of the other funds that the district holds. So on this chart, the red line is showing us last fiscal year 15-16. The blue line, this current fiscal year 16-17. You can see in general the same sort of shape to this chart that we saw on the last one, where during the first months of the year, our reserve position is declining because we're spending money every month, but we haven't yet received any property tax revenues for the year. We recognize that first installment of property tax revenues in December, which is when those payments are due, even though we typically don't see that cash deposited until January. The revenue gets recognized in December. And then we have more spending before our second installment of property tax revenues, which we recognize in April. So that's what you're seeing on the April dot in that blue line, is that we've our reserves are increased because we recognize that second installment of property tax revenue. So that was about another $56 million in revenue that's increasing our reserve position. We expect that to decline now in the remaining months of the fiscal year as money is spent, but we don't have revenues coming in to offset it, so that we expect to end the fiscal year where you see that dashed yellow line, which would be a reserve of approximately $21 million, and that represents 11.7% of our net budgeted expenditures. So looking at a little more detail at our revenue during the year, this chart is showing us our medic cost recovery revenue, and you'll probably remember from previous presentations as we've gone through the year that this is an area where our revenue has been trending below budget and also below what we experienced last year. So when we last talked about this in February, if you look at where that red line, which is this current fiscal year, was compared to the blue budget line or the green last year line, you can see there was a relatively significant gap there. I think the good news is that gap has closed a bit in the most recent 2 months, in March, April. Those have been strong months for that revenue source, and we're getting to be closer to be on track with budget. May was also another strong month. June, sort of remains to be seen how that month will close out, and then we also have an accrual at the end of the year, which will adjust our total revenue. But at this point, it does look like we are getting to be more on track with the budgeted revenue for this revenue source. This chart is showing us total revenues. So as we talked about on the reserves chart, you can see in April, looking at the red line, well, actually looking at all the lines, but this year following the same trend as last year, you can see that we had an uptick in revenues as a result of that second installment of property taxes. So total revenues through April of $175 million compared to our budget for the whole year of $188 million. Looking at expenses, this chart shows salaries and benefits expenses for the year. Again, red line this year, green line last year, blue line budget for this year. You can see that we're really tracking right along with our budget through April at about $127 million, and we expect to end the year about $157 million in expenditures. Looking at total expenditures, really seeing the same thing here, tracking right along with the budget number. Through April, total expenditures of $153 million, and we expect to end the year just under $189 million based on our mid-year budget. And finally, this last slide is showing our SERP fund, which is our OPEB or Retiree Medical Trust Fund. This is shown separately because this is not a district-held fund. It's held in a trust, and the amounts in this fund can only be used to pay future retiree medical premiums. We're contributing to this fund annually in accordance with our ARC requirements. You can see that as of April 30th, the total balance in the fund was just over $26 million, and that was comprised of about $23 million in contributions, again, over the life of the fund, and almost $3 million in interest earnings over the life of the fund. And you can see a lot of that interest earning accumulation has really occurred in recent months and within the last year. So some positive news there. So to summarize, the 10 months ending April 30th, our total revenues are generally tracking right along with the budget. We do have a little bit of below projection in our medic cost recovery through April, but we have seen the improvement in that revenue source over the last 2 months and expect that will continue through the remainder of the fiscal year to get us generally on track with the budget number. Our second installment of property tax revenues was recognized as revenue in April, but it's not yet included in the cash balance, so you'll see that in the next report. It'll show up in May. Our expenditures are also trending on budget. And general fund reserves are in positive territory and expected to meet the mid-year budget projections by the end of the year. And finally, our SERP fund has seen strong investment earnings with nearly $3 million in earnings since inception of the fund. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions you have.
No question. Well, any questions, Director? No. We have no questions. Thank you very much for your report, and things look promising.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Takes no action by this body. Our next meeting date is July 27th. We will determine what time we will hold that meeting as we get near to that date. And we don't have any anticipated action or presentation items. Any comments from members of the committee? No?
None.
All right, thank you. And at this time, we will adjourn.